Welcome to Monk's Temple. Let us begin with a question that will take a lifetime to answer. What were you named? Not the name on your birth certificate. Not the name your friends call you. I am asking about the invisible name. The one whispered into your existence before you could speak. The one carved into your psyche by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally but who, inevitably, failed. Maybe you were named too much. Maybe you were named not enough. Maybe you were named the reason your mother stayed or the reason your father left. Maybe you were named the smart one and now you are terrified of failing. Maybe you were named the problem and you have spent your entire life trying to prove everyone wrong. These names are not written anywhere. But they are real. They are the invisible chains we carry. They are the fetters that bind us to patterns of suffering we do not understand and cannot seem to break. 2,500 years ago, a man looked at his newborn son and gave him a name. The man was a prince named Siddhartha. The son was called Rahula. In the ancient language of that time, Rahula means fetter. It means chain. It means obstacle. It means shackle. This man was not cruel. He was drowning. He had seen sickness, old age, and death for the first time, and the sight had shattered him. He could no longer pretend that palace walls would protect him. He was desperate. He was terrified. And when he looked at his newborn son, he did not see a miracle. He saw another rope tying him to a ship that was sinking. So he named the boy Rahula. And then he left. This is not a comfortable story. We do not paint this scene on temple walls. We prefer to focus on the enlightenment, the beautiful teachings. But the messy human details are where we actually live. And if we want to understand freedom, we have to look at the chains. We have to look at the names we were given. For 7 years, Rahula lived inside that name. He grew up in the palace surrounded by luxury. He had the finest clothes, the best teachers, the most beautiful gardens. But he did not have a father. His father was gone. His father had walked out the night he was born and had not come back. Modern psychology calls this ambiguous loss. It is loss without closure. The person is not dead, so you cannot mourn. The person is not present, so you cannot connect. You are stuck waiting for a return that may never come. Children in this situation often develop anxious attachment. They become hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of abandonment. They become people pleasers, trying to earn the love that was never reliably given. Rahula tried. He studied warfare. He learned governance. He performed his duties flawlessly. And all the while, he listened for news of his father. Stories filtered back through travelers. Your father sat under a tree for 49 days. Your father defeated Mara. Your father teaches the end of suffering. Thousands follow him. Kings bow to him. And Rahula thought, he ended suffering for everyone except us. When Rahula was 7 years old, the Buddha returned to Kapilavatthu. Imagine that day. You have waited your whole life for this moment. In your imagination, your father sweeps you up in his arms. He tells you he is sorry. He tells you he loves you. He stays. The reality was nothing like that. The Buddha arrived with hundreds of monks. Yasodharā, Rahula's mother, dressed her son in his finest clothes. She adorned him with jewels. She told him, "Go to your father. Ask for your inheritance." She meant the kingdom. She meant the throne. So Rahula walked forward. He approached the man in robes. He looked up. He said, "Father, give me my inheritance." The Buddha looked down at him. Without a moment's hesitation, he turned to his chief disciple and said, "Give him the going forth." That was it. No explanation. No consultation. No asking Rahula what he wanted. The inheritance was not a kingdom. It was the robes. It was the path. And Rahula, without being asked, without being prepared, became a monk. They shaved his head that day. His long black hair fell to the stone floor. He felt the cool scissors against his scalp. He saw his mother in the crowd, her face a mask of grief. He saw his grandfather, the king, his jaw tight with rage. And he saw his father already turning away. No one asked Rahula how he felt. No one comforted him. The silence was absolute. That night, Rahula lay on a thin mat in a simple hut. The ground was hard. He was used to silk sheets, to soft pillows. Now he smelled earth and smoke. He was hungry. He had been too shy to hold out his bowl during alms round. His stomach ached. He thought of his mother. Was she crying? Did she miss him? He thought of his father. The man who walked away. The man who came back only to take him away too. And he thought, did I do something wrong? Is this a punishment? He did not say these thoughts out loud. He could not. The other monks were silent. Meditation was silent. But inside, Rahula was screaming. And no one heard him. This is where we begin. Not with enlightenment. Not with liberation. But with a 7-year-old boy, alone in the dark, carrying a name he did not choose, wondering if he would ever be seen. In our first part together, we left a 7-year-old boy alone in the dark. His head was shaved. His silk robes were gone. His mother was back in the palace, her face frozen in grief. His grandfather was furious. His father had walked away again. And Rahula, the boy named Fetter, lay on a hard mat, hungry and confused, wondering if he had done something wrong. That is where we begin again. Not with answers. Not with comfort. But with the raw, unvarnished experience of a child who has been given everything except what he actually needs. Let us sit with that for a moment. Because if you are honest with yourself, you know this feeling. You know what it is to be surrounded by plenty and still feel empty. You know what it is to have your basic needs met and still feel unseen. You know what it is to perform perfectly, to do everything right, and still wait for a love that never comes. This is the psychological inheritance of every human being who has ever lived. We are all, in some way, Rahula. We are all carrying an invisible name. We are all waiting for someone to come back. But here is the difference. Rahula's father did come back. He just did not come back in the way anyone expected. The Buddha did not return to be a father. He returned to be a teacher. And that is a very different thing. In the days following Rahula's ordination, the boy was assigned to Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple. Sariputta was not a warm man. He was not a hugger. He was the sharpest mind in the Sangha, renowned for his analytical brilliance, his penetrating wisdom, his ability to explain the most subtle points of the Dhamma. He was exactly what a brilliant student needed. He was exactly what a wounded 7-year-old did not need. Imagine being Rahula. You have just lost your mother, your home, your identity. You are living among strangers who speak a language of meditation and renunciation that you do not yet understand. And your new teacher is a genius who expects you to keep up. The texts do not record Rahula's struggles during this period. But we do not need texts to imagine them. We know what it is like to be the new kid. We know what it is like to feel stupid. We know what it is like to pretend we understand when we do not. We know what it is like to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we ended up here. Rahula lied. The texts do record that. He told small lies. Protective lies. The kind of lies children tell when they are afraid of getting in trouble, afraid of disappointing, afraid of being abandoned again. Visitors would come to see the Buddha. Rahula, tasked with managing visitors, would sometimes tell them the Buddha was available when he was not. He did not want to turn anyone away. He did not want to be the bearer of bad news. He did not want anyone to feel the disappointment he had felt his whole life. Small lies. Harmless lies. Except the Buddha did not see them as harmless. One day, the Buddha called Rahula to him. He did not yell. He did not punish. He did something far more effective. He asked Rahula to bring him a bowl of water and a dipper. Rahula brought them. The Buddha held up the dipper. He said, "Do you see this little bit of water left in the dipper?" Rahula nodded. The Buddha said, "So little, Rahula, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie." Then he poured the water out. He held up the empty dipper. He said, "So empty, Rahula, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie." Then he turned the dipper upside down. He said, "So overturned, Rahula, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie." Then he set the dipper down and said, "So empty and useless, Rahula, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie." This is the mirror teaching. The Buddha did not say Rahula was bad. He did not say Rahula was a liar. He simply showed Rahula what happens when we lie. We become like that dipper. Empty. Useless. Overturned. Unable to hold anything of value. Rahula never lied again. Not because he was scared of punishment, but because he had seen himself clearly for the first time. This is the first gift the Buddha gave his son. Not affection. Not validation. Not the love Rahula had been craving. But something perhaps more valuable, the ability to see himself honestly. Modern psychology confirms what the Buddha understood intuitively. Shame does not change behavior. Punishment does not create integrity. But clear seeing does. When we see ourselves clearly, without judgment, without evasion, we naturally want to align our actions with our values. We naturally want to be people we can respect. Rahula began to change. Not overnight. Not dramatically. But gradually, breath by breath, moment by moment. He started paying attention to his words before he spoke them. He started noticing the impulse to exaggerate, to omit, to twist. He started choosing truth, not because he was ordered to, but because he had seen what falsehood did to the bowl of his life. This is the practice. This is the path. Not perfection, but awareness. Not never lying, but noticing the urge to lie. Not becoming someone else, but seeing clearly who we already are. And in that seeing, something begins to shift. The chains loosen. The name loses its power. The boy named Fetter starts to become free. We have been walking with Rahula through the early days of his monastic life. In part 2, we saw him confronted by the Buddha's mirror teaching, the lesson about truth that would shape the rest of his practice. But knowing the truth and living the truth are two different things. Between the teaching and the transformation lies the long, slow work of actually changing. This is where we find Rahula now. He has been given the mirror. He has seen himself clearly. But seeing is only the beginning. Let us talk about what practice actually feels like. Not the romantic version, not the enlightenment in a flash version, but the daily, grinding, boring, frustrating version. The version where you sit down to meditate and your mind immediately runs through every embarrassing thing you have said in the last 10 years. The version where you try to be mindful and immediately forget to be mindful. The version where you know what you should do and then do the opposite anyway. This was Rahula's life for years. He was not a natural meditator. He was not a saint from birth. He was a boy with a wounded heart trying to sit still while his wounds ached. The Buddha, seeing this, gave Rahula another teaching. This one was not about truth. It was about the breath. The Buddha said, Rahula, develop a mind like the earth. People throw clean and unclean things on the earth, flowers, excrement, perfume, garbage, and the earth does not recoil. It just receives everything equally. Develop a mind like water. People wash clean and unclean things in water, and the water does not recoil. Develop a mind like fire. Fire burns clean and unclean things without distinction. Develop a mind like air. Air carries all smells, sweet and foul, and does not cling to any of them. Then he taught Rahula to follow the breath. In and out. In and out. Not controlling the breath, just noticing it. Feeling the coolness at the tip of the nose. Feeling the rise and fall of the chest. Feeling the simple fact of being alive. For Rahula, this was revolutionary. His whole life had been defined by what was missing. His mind was constantly reaching for what was not there. But the breath is always there. It is always now. It does not depend on anyone else. It does not require anything to be different. When Rahula sat and followed his breath, he was not the abandoned son. He was not the novice monk. He was not the boy who had been named Fetter. He was just breathing. Just present. Just alive. This is the practice that saved him. Not philosophy. Not theology. Not even the teachings of his father. Just the breath. Just the body. Just the simple, radical act of being here, now, without needing anything to change. But let us be honest. Even with the breath, Rahula struggled. There were days when meditation felt impossible. Days when his mind was a storm of memories and longings and resentments. Days when he sat for hours and felt nothing but his own misery. One such day, Rahula went to Sariputta and asked for help. He said, "Venerable Sir, when I meditate, my mind is cloudy. I cannot see clearly. I feel stuck." Sariputta looked at him with those sharp eyes and said, "Rahula, when you look into a bowl of water that is mixed with dye, can you see your face clearly? No, venerable sir. When you look into a bowl of water that is covered with moss, can you see your face clearly? No, venerable sir. When you look into a bowl of water that is disturbed by wind, can you see your face clearly? No, venerable sir. When you look into a bowl of water that is muddy and still, can you see your face clearly? No, venerable sir. Sariputta said. In the same way, Rahula, when the mind is clouded by desire, by aversion, by restlessness, by doubt, you cannot see yourself clearly. You cannot see the way things actually are. So what must you do? Rahula said, I must let the water settle. Sariputta nodded. That is all. Just let it settle. This is another teaching that modern psychology confirms. We cannot think our way out of confusion. We cannot fight our way out of suffering. We can only let the water settle. We can only sit still long enough for the mud to drift to the bottom. We can only wait, patiently, breath by breath, for clarity to arise on its own. Rahula learned to wait. He learned to sit with the mud without stirring it up. He learned to watch his thoughts without believing them. He learned to let the water settle. And slowly, imperceptibly, the water began to clear. We have been walking with Rahula through the landscape of his becoming. In part 4, we saw him collapse under a tree, run out of places to run to, and finally stop. That stopping was not the end of his suffering. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Now we arrive at a teaching that would become the cornerstone of Rahula's practice. A teaching so simple that most people overlook it. A teaching so profound that it has sustained meditators for 2,500 years. The Buddha came to see Rahula one evening. This was rare. Usually, Rahula went to his father. Usually, the relationship was teacher and student, formal and distant. But this time, the Buddha came to him. They sat together as the sun set. The sky turned orange, then purple, then deep blue. The first stars appeared. The Buddha waited. He was in no hurry. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Finally, he spoke. He said, Rahula, do you remember when I taught you about the earth? Rahula nodded. He remembered. Develop a mind like the earth. Receive everything equally. Flowers and garbage. Praise and blame. Let it all land and do not cling. The Buddha said, now I want to teach you something else. I want to teach you about the breath. Not just watching the breath, but using the breath. Not just noticing, but transforming. And then the Buddha gave Rahula the most detailed meditation instruction in all of the early scriptures. It is preserved in the Anapanasati Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness of breathing. The Buddha taught him to follow the breath in 16 steps. He taught him to notice the long breath and the short breath. He taught him to experience the whole body with each breath. He taught him to calm the bodily formations with each breath. He taught him to experience rapture, to experience pleasure, to experience the mind, to calm the mind, to liberate the mind. Step by step, breath by breath, the Buddha led Rahula through the entire landscape of human experience. For Rahula, this was like being given a map of a country he had been wandering in blindly his whole life. He had always known there was something wrong. He had always known there was something more. But he had never been shown the way. Now he was being shown. Let us pause here and talk about what the breath actually is. From a modern scientific perspective, the breath is the bridge between the voluntary and involuntary nervous systems. You cannot control your heartbeat directly. You cannot tell your digestion to speed up or slow down. But you can control your breath. And when you control your breath, you influence your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your stress response, your entire physiological state. This is why every sophisticated healing tradition, from yoga to biofeedback to modern cognitive therapy, uses the breath as a primary tool for regulation. From a psychological perspective, the breath is the anchor. When your mind is lost in memory or fear or fantasy, the breath is always here, always now, always available to bring you back to the present moment. It is like a rope tied to the dock of now. No matter how far out into the ocean of rumination you drift, you can always pull yourself back by following the breath. From a Buddhist perspective, the breath is the ultimate teacher. It teaches impermanence. Each breath arises and passes away, and no two breaths are exactly the same. It teaches non-self. You cannot own the breath, you can only receive it. It teaches dependent origination. The breath arises due to conditions, not because you will it into existence. It teaches contentment. The breath is always enough, always sufficient, always present. Rahula practiced this teaching. Day after day, night after night. He sat in the forest, in the hut, under the trees. He followed his breath. He watched it lengthen and shorten. He felt it in his body. He calmed it with his attention. He experienced rapture, then pleasure, then something beyond pleasure. And slowly, imperceptibly, the chains began to loosen. Not because he escaped his past. Not because he forgave his father. Not because he stopped missing his mother. But because he found something that was always there, always present, always available. He found the breath. And in the breath, he found himself. There is a story from this period. It is not in the scriptures, but it could be. One night, Rahula was meditating in the forest. A storm came up suddenly. Wind tore through the trees. Rain fell in sheets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in brief, violent flashes. Thunder shook the ground. Animals ran for cover. But Rahula sat through it all, following his breath. In the morning, another monk found him. He was soaked, shivering, but strangely peaceful. The monk asked, "Weren't you afraid?" The storm was terrifying. The thunder shook the very earth. Rahula looked at him with calm eyes and said, "The storm comes and goes. The trees bend and straighten. The rain falls and stops. The thunder roars and fades. But the breath continues. In and out. In and out. What is there to fear? The storm was outside me. The breath was inside me. I stayed with what was inside, and the outside could not touch me." This is what practice does. It does not remove the storms. It does not make the rain stop. It does not silence the thunder. It gives you something that continues through the storm. It gives you the breath. And the breath is enough. Another time, Rahula was practicing in a crowded area. Monks were walking, talking, chanting. Noise was everywhere. Distraction was constant. Rahula sat in the middle of it all, following his breath. A younger monk came to him and said, how can you meditate with all this noise? It's impossible to concentrate. Rahula said, the noise is like the rain. It falls everywhere. But the breath is like the earth. It receives the rain without being disturbed. Let the noise be noise. Let the breath be breath. They are not enemies. They are just different expressions of the same reality. This is a profound teaching. Most of us believe that we need silence to meditate, peace to practice, ideal conditions to find ourselves. But Rahula learned that the breath is available in all conditions. In noise and silence, in storm and calm, in chaos and order. The breath is always there. The question is whether we are there with it. Rahula began to be there with it. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but persistently. He kept sitting. He kept breathing. He kept coming back, moment after moment, breath after breath. And slowly, the boy who had been named Fetter began to experience something he had never known. Not happiness exactly. Not peace exactly. Something more fundamental. Something that had been there all along, buried under the weight of his story. He began to experience presence itself. The simple, undeniable fact of being alive, being aware, being here. And in that presence, the chains started to feel less like chains and more like stories. And stories, he discovered, could be revised. They could be seen through. They could be let go. This is the gift of the breath. It does not change your past. It does not fix your wounds. It does not bring your father back or make your mother stop crying. But it shows you something that was always true: you are more than your story. You are more than your wounds. You are more than the name you were given. You are the one who breathes. And the one who breathes is already free. We have been walking with Rahula through the deepening of his practice. In part 5, we saw him receive the detailed meditation instruction on mindfulness of breathing. We saw him sit through storms and discover that the breath continues through all of it. But practice does not exist in a vacuum. Rahula was living in a community of monks, and communities have their own challenges. Now we come to a part of the story that is rarely told: how Rahula learned to live with others while staying true to himself. The Sangha was not a peaceful place. It was full of human beings, jealous, ambitious, insecure, competitive human beings. Some monks had been Brahmins, some had been kings, some had been merchants, some had been outcasts. They all brought their histories with them. They all brought their wounds. And they all brought their opinions about who deserved what. Some monks resented Rahula. They whispered that he only got special attention because he was the Buddha's son. They said his quick progress was due to privilege, not practice. They watched him for signs of favoritism, ready to pounce on any evidence that he was being treated differently. Rahula heard these whispers. He felt the eyes on him. He knew that every mistake he made would be magnified, every achievement would be doubted. This is a psychological burden that many people carry. The imposter syndrome. The sense that you do not really belong, that you are only here because of some accident of birth or circumstance. For Rahula, it was even more complicated. The whispers were not entirely wrong. He was the Buddha's son. He did have access to teachings that others might not have. He did receive personal instruction from the most enlightened being in the world. All of this was true. And yet, none of it made his practice easier. None of it filled the hole left by his father's absence. One day, an older monk confronted Rahula directly. He said, "You think you are special because you are the Buddha's son. But the Dhamma does not care whose son you are. The Dhamma cares about practice. What have you practiced? Or are you just coasting on your father's name?" Rahula felt the words like a slap. His face burned. Every defense mechanism in his body activated. He wanted to lash out. He wanted to list all his achievements. He wanted to prove this monk wrong. But instead, he paused. He took a breath. He remembered the teaching, develop a mind like the earth. Receive everything equally. Praise and blame, respect and contempt. Let it all land and do not cling. He looked at the monk and said, "You are right. The Dhamma does not care whose son I am. So I must care even more about my practice. Thank you for reminding me." The monk was stunned. He had expected anger, defensiveness, a scene. Instead, he received gratitude. Something shifted in him. He later became one of Rahula's closest friends in the Sangha. This is the power of practice. It does not make criticism stop hurting. It gives you the space to respond instead of react. It gives you the breath between the stimulus and the response, and in that breath, freedom becomes possible. Rahula learned to use that breath. He learned to receive praise without inflation and blame without collapse. He learned to be grateful for those who challenged him, because they showed him where he was still clinging. There is a modern psychological concept called non-defensive responsiveness. It is the ability to hear criticism without becoming defensive, to receive feedback without collapsing into shame. Research shows that this ability is one of the strongest predictors of healthy relationships and personal growth. But it cannot be faked. It must be cultivated, breath by breath, moment by moment. Rahula cultivated this. Not perfectly, but persistently. He kept sitting. He kept breathing. He kept letting the water settle. And over time, the whispers stopped mattering. Not because they stopped happening, but because he stopped being moved by them. He became like the earth. Flowers and garbage, both received equally. Praise and blame, both landing and passing. The breath continuing through all of it. Another time, a different monk came to Rahula with praise. He said, "You are so fortunate to be the Buddha's son. You will surely reach enlightenment quickly." Rahula received this praise the same way he received criticism. He did not inflate. He did not agree. He just said, "The path is the same for everyone. Breath by breath. Step by step. There is no shortcut, even for a son." This is remarkable. Most of us are desperate for praise. We build our identities on it. But Rahula had learned that praise and blame are two sides of the same coin. Both are external. Both are unreliable. Both come and go. There is a story from this period that illustrates how far Rahula had come. A group of monks were arguing about a point of Dhamma. The argument grew heated. Voices were raised. The monastery was divided. Rahula was present but silent. He did not take sides. He did not try to convince anyone. He just sat, breathing, present. After the argument ended, one of the monks came to him and said, "Why didn't you speak? You are the Buddha's son. Your voice carries weight." Rahula said, "The Dhamma is not about winning arguments. It is about ending suffering. If my speaking would have helped, I would have spoken. If my silence helps, I will be silent. The truth does not need defenders. It needs practitioners. This is the wisdom that comes from years of practice. The wisdom that knows when to speak and when to stay silent. The wisdom that is not attached to being right." Rahula had become someone who could hold his own center in the midst of chaos. He had become like a mountain, unmoved by the winds of praise and blame. He had become like the earth, receiving everything without clinging. This is the freedom that practice offers. Not freedom from others' opinions, but freedom from being controlled by them. Not freedom from criticism, but freedom from the suffering that criticism used to cause. Rahula was becoming free. Not because his father loved him. Not because the Sangha accepted him. But because he had found something that could not be taken away. He had found the breath. He had found the earth. He had found himself. We have been walking with Rahula through the complex terrain of monastic life. In part 6, we saw him learn to receive criticism without defensiveness, to become like the earth that receives everything equally. But receiving criticism is one thing. Receiving silence from the one person whose voice you most want to hear is something else entirely. Now we come to a part of the story that cuts to the heart of Rahula's wound. The relationship with his father. For years, Rahula lived in the same community as the Buddha. He saw him every day. He heard him teach. He watched him walk through the monastery, surrounded by monks, radiating that incomprehensible peace. But he rarely spoke to him directly. And when he did, it was always as teacher and student, never as father and son. The Buddha never pulled Rahula aside for a private conversation. Never asked how he was really doing. Never apologized for leaving. Never explained why he had named him Fetter. Never said the words Rahula had been waiting his whole life to hear, "I love you. I am sorry. I am proud of you." This silence was its own kind of suffering. Rahula would watch other monks have private audiences with the Buddha. He would see them emerge from the hut with tears in their eyes, transformed by some personal teaching. And he would wonder, why not me? Why does he never call me? The psychological term for this is emotional neglect. It is not about what happened. It is about what did not happen. The missed connections. The unspoken words. The love that was never expressed. Emotional neglect is invisible, which makes it insidious. You cannot point to a specific wound. You can only feel the absence. Rahula felt the absence every day. One evening, Rahula could bear it no longer. He went to the Buddha's hut. He stood outside, his heart pounding. He wanted to knock. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to finally have the conversation they should have had years ago. But he did not knock. He stood there in the darkness, breathing. In and out. In and out. He felt the cool night air on his skin. He heard the distant sound of crickets. He felt the weight of his own longing. And then, without knocking, he turned and walked away. Why? Because in that moment, standing outside his father's door, Rahula realized something crucial. He realized that even if the Buddha opened the door, even if he said all the right words, even if he apologized and explained and expressed his love, none of it would fill the hole. Because the hole was not caused by the absence of words. The hole was caused by the belief that words could fill it. Rahula saw that he had been waiting his whole life for someone else to complete him. First his father, then his mother, then Sariputta, then the Sangha. He had been looking outside himself for something that could only be found inside. This is one of the great psychological insights of Buddhism. We spend our lives searching for someone to give us what we feel is missing. We look for love, for validation, for recognition. And when we find it, it feels good, for a while. But the feeling never lasts. The hole always returns. Because the hole was never caused by a lack of external validation. The hole was caused by the mistaken belief that we are separate, incomplete, lacking. Rahula saw through this belief. Not completely, not permanently, but in a glimpse. He saw that the wholeness he was seeking was already here. It had always been here. It was covered over by the seeking itself. He walked back to his hut and sat down to meditate. He followed his breath. He felt his body. He noticed the thoughts arising and passing. He doesn't love me. He never loved me. I am alone. I will always be alone. He watched these thoughts like clouds in the sky. They came. They stayed. They went. And underneath them, something else was present. Something that had never been absent. Something that needed nothing from anyone. Rahula sat with that something. He did not name it. He did not grasp it. He just sat. And for the first time in his life, he was not waiting for anything. The next morning, Rahula saw the Buddha walking through the monastery. Their eyes met for a moment. The Buddha smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. And Rahula smiled back. Not because anything had changed. But because nothing needed to change. This is the paradox of awakening. You spend years seeking something, and then you realize that what you were seeking was the seeker itself. You spend years trying to fill a hole, and then you discover that the hole was just a shadow cast by your own hand reaching for something outside yourself. Rahula had not yet attained full enlightenment. He would continue to practice for years. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer a child waiting for his father to love him. He was a young man learning to love himself. And in that love, the chains began to loosen. The name Rahula, fetter, started to feel like just a name, just a sound, just a story. And stories, he was learning, could be revised. They could be seen through. They could be let go. We have been walking with Rahula through the deepest waters of his inner life. In part 7, we saw him stand outside his father's hut, longing for a connection that would never come, and then turn away. We saw him discover that the wholeness he was seeking had been inside him all along. But insights are not permanent. They come and go like waves. The real work is learning to live from that insight even when the feeling of it fades. Now we come to a period in Rahula's life that is rarely discussed but essential to understand. The years between his first glimpse of freedom and his final enlightenment. The long, slow, unglamorous middle of the path. After that night outside the Buddha's hut, Rahula did not suddenly become enlightened. He did not float on a cloud of bliss. He got up the next morning and did the same things he had done every day for years. He went on alms round. He sat in meditation. He studied the suttas. He swept the pathways. He washed his robes. He lived the ordinary, repetitive, often boring life of a monk. This is the part of spiritual practice that nobody romanticizes. The thousands of hours of just sitting. The countless mornings of waking up before dawn. The endless cycles of striving and failing and striving again. The quiet despair of feeling like you are making no progress at all. Rahula knew this despair. He knew what it was like to sit for hours, following his breath, and feel nothing but restlessness and doubt. He knew what it was like to hear the Buddha teach about enlightenment and wonder if it was even possible for someone like him. He knew what it was like to look at other monks who seemed so peaceful, so advanced, and feel like a fraud. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of practice, Rahula went to Sariputta. He found him sitting under a tree, his eyes half closed, his face completely still. Rahula sat down beside him and waited. After a long silence, Sariputta opened his eyes and looked at Rahula. He said, "You are struggling." It was not a question. It was a statement. Rahula nodded. He said, "I have been practicing for years. I have followed the breath. I have studied the teachings. I have done everything asked of me. And still, I feel stuck. Still, the chains feel heavy. Still, I wonder if I will ever be free." Sariputta was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Rahula, when you were a child, did you ever try to open a door that was too high for you to reach?" Rahula nodded. He remembered standing on his toes, stretching his small arms, trying to reach the handle. He remembered the frustration of being too small, too short, too weak. Sariputta said, "What did you do?" Rahula said, "I waited. I grew. And one day, I reached it." Sariputta said, "Practice is like that. You cannot force the door open before you are ready. You cannot will yourself to enlightenment. You can only keep growing. Keep sitting. Keep breathing. And one day, without warning, the door will open. Not because you forced it. Because you became someone who could walk through it." This is a profound teaching. We live in a culture that wants results now. We want the enlightenment without the years of practice. We want the freedom without the discipline. We want the door to open just because we want it to. But the Dhamma does not work that way. It works the way trees grow, slowly, silently, invisibly, until one day you look and realize how much has changed. Rahula took this teaching to heart. He stopped measuring his progress. He stopped comparing himself to others. He stopped waiting for some dramatic breakthrough. He just kept practicing. Day after day. Breath after breath. Moment after moment. There is a story from this period. A young monk came to Rahula and asked, "How long does it take to become enlightened?" Rahula said, "How long does it take for a seed to become a tree?" The young monk said, "It depends. On the soil. On the rain. On the sun. On many things." Rahula said, Exactly. Practice is like that. It depends on many things. But one thing is certain, if you keep watering the seed, it will grow. If you stop watering it, it will not. So keep watering. Keep practicing. And do not worry about how long it takes. This is the wisdom of someone who has stopped grasping for results. Someone who has made peace with the process. Someone who trusts that the path, if walked consistently, leads where it leads. Modern psychology confirms this. Research on habit formation shows that consistency matters more than intensity. A person who meditates for 10 minutes every day will progress further than someone who meditates for 2 hours once a month. The brain changes slowly, through repetition, through thousands of small moments of returning to the present. Rahula was changing. Not dramatically. Not noticeably. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. The chains were rusting. The fetters were weakening. The name was losing its power. He did not feel this happening. That is important. Most of the time, he felt exactly the same as he always had. He still had doubts. He still had desires. He still had moments of longing for his mother, his home, his old life. But these things no longer defined him. They came and went like weather, and underneath them, something stable remained. That something was awareness itself. The simple, undeniable fact of being conscious. The awareness that watched thoughts come and go. The awareness that noticed feelings arise and pass. The awareness that had always been there, even when he was a child waiting for a father who never came. Rahula was learning to rest in that awareness. Not to grasp it. Not to cling to it. Just to rest in it, the way you rest in a comfortable chair at the end of a long day. And in that resting, the path opened before him. Not as something to achieve. Not as something to become. But as something to walk, step by step, breath by breath, moment by moment. We have been walking with Rahula through the long, unglamorous middle of the path. In part 8, we saw him learn to stop grasping for results, to trust the slow growth of practice, to rest in awareness itself. But the path does not end with resting. There comes a moment when resting transforms into something else. Something that cannot be described, only pointed at. Now we come to the culmination of Rahula's journey. The moment that everything else was preparation for. It happened on an ordinary day. There was no fanfare. No celestial signs. No dramatic announcements. Rahula was doing what he had done thousands of times before. He was sitting in meditation, following his breath, watching his mind. But something was different. The watching had become effortless. The breathing had become natural. The separation between the watcher and the watched had dissolved. In that dissolution, Rahula saw something he had never seen before. He saw that the chains were never real. They were made of thought. They were constructed from stories. They existed only because he believed in them. And in that seeing, they fell away. Not because he broke them. Not because he fought them. But because he finally understood that they were never there in the first place. This is what enlightenment is in the Buddhist tradition. Not the acquisition of something new. Not the achievement of a special state. But the removal of what was never real. The cessation of delusion. The end of mistaken identity. Rahula became an arahant, a fully awakened being. He was likely one of the youngest in the early Sangha to attain this. Still in his 20s, he had completed the journey that his father had begun on the night he left the palace. But what does that mean? What does it feel like to be enlightened? The texts do not describe it in emotional terms. They do not say Rahula was happy or peaceful or joyful. Those words are too small. They describe states that come and go. Enlightenment is not a state. It is the end of being controlled by states. Rahula still felt things. He still experienced pleasure and pain. He still knew hunger and satisfaction. He still remembered his mother, his childhood, the night his father left. But these things no longer bound him. They arose and passed like clouds in a vast sky, and the sky itself was untouched. Imagine being so free that the past no longer defines you. Imagine being so free that the name Rahula becomes just a sound, not an identity. Imagine being so free that you can look at your father. The man who left you, the man who took you from your mother, the man who made you a monk at 7, and feel nothing but compassion. No resentment. No longing. No need for an apology. Just compassion for his suffering, and gratitude for his teaching. That is enlightenment. Not the end of pain, but the end of being imprisoned by pain. There is a story from after Rahula's enlightenment. The Buddha was teaching one day, and Rahula was sitting among the monks. The Buddha looked at him and said to the assembly, "This is my son Rahula. He has realized the same freedom that I have realized. The Dhamma that I taught him has become his own." It was the first time the Buddha had publicly acknowledged Rahula as his son. Not as a novice. Not as a student. But as a son. And the acknowledgement came not because Rahula needed it, but because others needed to hear it. Rahula sat there, unmoved. He did not swell with pride. He did not weep with joy. He simply received the words the way the earth receives rain. They landed. They soaked in. They passed. After the teaching, a monk came to Rahula and said, "How did you feel when the Buddha called you his son?" Rahula said, "When the Buddha calls me his son, I hear sounds. When the wind blows through the trees, I hear sounds. Both are just sounds. Both arise and pass. Neither adds anything to me. Neither takes anything away." The monk was confused. He said, "But surely it means something. Surely it is special to be the Buddha's son." Rahula looked at him with infinite gentleness and said, "The Buddha is my father by birth. But the Dhamma is my father by truth. And the Dhamma has no children. The Dhamma is just the Dhamma. I am just what I am. There is nothing special about that." This is the humility of enlightenment. Not false modesty. Not self-deprecation. Just the simple recognition that there is no self to be special. There is just this. Just presence. Just awareness. Just the suchness of things as they are. Rahula had become what he was always meant to become. Not the prince of a kingdom. Not the son of a famous father. But a free being. A liberated one. An arahant. And the most remarkable thing, nothing had changed. He still wore the same robes. He still carried the same bowl. He still walked the same paths. He still ate the same food. The only difference was that the one who wore the robes, carried the bowl, walked the paths, and ate the food was no longer trapped in the story of who he was supposed to be. He was just here. Just present. Just awake. And that was enough. We have walked a long path together. From the night Rahula was named fetter to the moment he became free. We have sat with him in his loneliness, his confusion, his rebellion, his practice, and finally his awakening. But every story has an ending, and Rahula's story is no different. Rahula died before his father. We do not know exactly when or how. Some traditions say he died of an illness in his late 20s or early 30s. Others say he simply passed away peacefully, his meditation complete. The details are lost to history. But one detail matters: the Buddha outlived his son. The man who walked away when Rahula was born had to watch him die. The man who left to find freedom had to experience the loss of his child. Enlightenment did not protect him from grief. It did not make him numb. It made him present. It made him able to hold the grief without being destroyed by it. Imagine that funeral. Imagine the Buddha standing over the body of his son. Imagine the monks gathered around. Imagine the silence. The texts do not record the Buddha weeping. But they do not need to. We know what grief feels like. We know that presence and pain can coexist. After the cremation, the monks came to the Buddha. They did not know what to say. How do you comfort someone who has lost a child? How do you offer solace to the enlightened one? The Buddha looked at them and said, Rahula was free. He was free before he died. He was free while he lived. He was free from the moment he saw through the chains. His death is not a tragedy. It is the completion of a life well lived. Then he said something that has been preserved through the centuries: the body dies. The mind dies. Feelings die. Perceptions die. Formations die. Consciousness dies. But what Rahula became, that does not die. That was never born. That cannot be lost. This is the deepest teaching of Buddhism. Not that we live forever. Not that we are reunited with loved ones in some heavenly realm. But that what we truly are was never born and cannot die. The one who was named fetter was a temporary manifestation. The one who awakened to freedom was the timeless itself, appearing in time. Rahula's legacy did not end with his death. He became the model for every child monk who would come after him. The rules about ordaining minors, requiring parental permission, were shaped by his story. The methods for teaching meditation to young people were developed through his practice. The understanding that awakening is possible for anyone, regardless of age or background, was proven by his life. In the centuries after his death, Rahula was remembered in different ways. In Theravada Buddhism, he is the exemplar of diligence, the one foremost in willingness to train. In Mahayana Buddhism, he appears in sutras as a bodhisattva, one who delays his own final liberation to help others. In art, he is depicted as a young monk, often with his begging bowl, sometimes with his mother Yasodharā, sometimes with his father the Buddha. But all these representations point to the same truth. The boy named Fetter became free. The son who was abandoned found what he was looking for. The prince who lost a kingdom gained something that cannot be lost. What about you? You have been walking with Rāhula for hours now. You have heard his story. You have felt his pain. You have watched him struggle and grow and finally awaken. Now the question returns to you. What were you named? Not by your parents, but by your circumstances. Not on your birth certificate, but in the quiet moments when you feel most alone. What chains are you carrying? What fetters bind you? What story have you been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve? Rahula's story says that these chains can be broken. Not by escaping them, but by seeing through them. Not by becoming someone else, but by realizing who you have always been. The breath is still here. The awareness is still here. The freedom is still here. It has always been here. It was covered over by the seeking itself. Rāhula found this. He found it through years of practice, through countless moments of sitting, through endless cycles of falling and getting up again. But he found it. And if he found it, so can you. Not because you are special. Not because you are lucky. But because you are here, breathing, aware, alive. And that is enough. The path is open. The bowl is empty. The breath is waiting. Go well.